In February 1872, something happened in Standard Oil's home city that did not look like a collapse. There were no riots, no bank runs, no headlines screaming panic the next morning. But by sunrise, 22 companies were effectively dead. Their offices still existed. Their workers still showed up. Their oil still sat in barrels along the Cuyahoga River. But they had been cut off from movement. Railroads, the only arteries that could carry oil to market, had quietly changed their pricing overnight. Not publicly, not equally, privately. If you were aligned with John D. Rockefeller, your shipping costs dropped. If you were not, your costs doubled. Some were charged so much they could not move a single barrel without losing money. Imagine waking up and discovering that every road out of your city now charges you double, while your competitor across the street pays half. That was the moment the market stopped being a market. It became a controlled system. Officially, this was described as efficiency, a rationalization of transport, a modernization of industry. But in reality, it was something far simpler. Control the route, and you decide who survives the journey. What disappeared that night was not oil. It was optionality. And once optionality disappears, collapse does not look like an explosion. It looks like silence. Before the night the map went dark, nothing about John D. Rockefeller looked like a destroyer of markets. He presented himself as a stabilizer. In the 1860s, the oil industry was chaos. Prices swung violently. Refiners undercut each other. Kerosene, the primary product, could drop 50% in value within months. Fortunes appeared and vanished in a single season. To the public, competition looked like progress. To Rockefeller, it looked like waste. He believed something different, and he said it openly. Competition, in his view, was a form of inefficiency, even a kind of moral failure, a system where too many players chased too little stability. So he began offering something that sounded reasonable: consistency, reliable pricing, predictable supply, coordinated logistics. Railroads liked this idea. They were tired of negotiating with dozens of small refiners, each shipping inconsistent volumes, each demanding discounts. Rockefeller came with a different proposal. Centralize through me. I will guarantee volume. I will reduce uncertainty. I will make your operation smoother, and in return I receive preferential rates. It sounded like a partnership. It was not, because hidden inside that agreement was a structural shift, one that most of his competitors didn't even recognize as dangerous. They believed they were still competing on product, better refining, lower costs, higher quality kerosene. But the battlefield had already moved. It was no longer about oil. It was about movement. And the moment movement becomes controlled, quality stops mattering. Imagine you were a small refiner in Cleveland in 1871. You work 14 hours a day, your margins are thin, your barrels are ready. But your competitor, aligned with Standard Oil, is quietly paying less to reach the same market. Not because they are better, because they are inside the system. This is how monopolies begin, not with force, but with a promise that feels like order to everyone except the people about to be erased. The public story said Standard Oil succeeded because it was more efficient. The forensic record says something else. It got paid when its competitors shipped oil. This was the mechanism that turned advantage into inevitability. It was called the rebate system. But that word is too soft for what it actually did. Here is how it worked. When a small refiner shipped a barrel of oil by rail, they paid a standard rate. Let's say $2 per barrel. Rockefeller, shipping through private agreements, might pay $1.50 for the same route. That alone would have been enough to create pressure. But the system went further. For every barrel his competitors shipped, Rockefeller received a kickback, a hidden payment. Quiet, contractual. So if you were a small refiner paying $2 per barrel, a portion of that payment did not stay with the railroad. It flowed to your largest competitor. You were not just losing on cost. You were financing the entity that was eliminating you. Imagine running a store where every sale your competitor makes triggers a deposit into your bank account. Now invert it. That was the position of independent refiners in 1872. They were trapped inside a system where activity itself accelerated their own extinction. This arrangement was formalized through an organization called the South Improvement Company. On paper, it was presented as a coordination body, a way to stabilize freight rates and eliminate destructive competition. In reality, it was a closed network. Only insiders received the favorable rates. Only insiders knew the true pricing structure. And most critically, insiders received intelligence, shipping data, volumes, destinations, which competitor was expanding, which one was struggling, which one could be pressured, and when. This is where the monopoly stopped being a pricing advantage and became an information weapon. Imagine you are that same Cleveland refiner. You cut costs, you improve efficiency, you work harder, but every move you make is visible to your largest competitor before it becomes public. They know when you increase shipments. They know when your volumes drop. They know when you are vulnerable, and they can adjust pricing, not across the market, but specifically against you. This is not competition. This is targeting. And once targeting enters the system, outcomes stop being uncertain. They become engineered. Most businesses fail slowly. They lose customers, they misprice, they fall behind. But in Cleveland in 1872, failure was accelerated, compressed, engineered into a single night. Because once the rebate machine was fully operational, there was no path left for independent survival. You could not outwork it. You could not outprice it. You could not outmaneuver it, because the game you thought you were playing no longer existed. And the most dangerous part, almost no one understood the system while they were inside it. They thought they were losing a competition. They were actually being drained by a structure designed to make their survival mathematically impossible. The system did not collapse. It snapped shut. In early 1872, word of the South Improvement Company agreements began to leak. Not through official channels, but through whispers, invoices, and sudden unexplainable pricing shifts. Refiners compared notes. Rates didn't match. Routes didn't match. Nothing matched. And then the realization spread. They were not competing on equal ground. They were inside a rigged network. The response was immediate, but it was already too late. Meetings were called across Cleveland. Independent refiners gathered in crowded rooms thick with oil fumes and panic. Some demanded legal action. Others begged the railroads for equal treatment. But the railroads had already chosen volume over fairness, stability over plurality, and Standard Oil offered both. Then came the pressure. Not public, not dramatic, precise. Selective price cuts in specific regions. Temporary underpricing targeted at individual refiners. Buyout offers delivered at exactly the moment cash flow tighten. Imagine you are that machinist turned refiner. Your shipments slow, your costs rise, your credit tightens. Then a letter arrives. Sell now at a discount or continue operating at a loss you cannot sustain. Some resisted. They held out for better terms. They believed exposure of the system would reverse it. But the network did not reopen, because once a bottleneck is captured, it does not negotiate with the people passing through it. It filters them. Within weeks, the outcome was clear. Those who sold early received something, often stock in Standard Oil, a promise of participation in the new system. Those who resisted were drained, not shut down overnight, but slowly suffocated. Credit withdrawn, shipping delayed, costs increased just enough to ensure failure. No courtroom collapse, no dramatic bankruptcies in headlines, just quiet transfers of ownership, assets moving from many hands into one structure. This is what control looks like at its most efficient. No chaos, no visible violence, just a network closing and deciding with precision who is allowed to keep moving. And by the time the public understood what had happened, the system was no longer forming. It was already complete. When the consolidation was complete, the official story was simple. Efficiency had won. Standard Oil controlled roughly 90% of U.S. oil refining within a decade. Prices, over time, did fall. Kerosene became cheaper for consumers. Historians would later point to this as evidence that the system worked. But that depends on where you stand, because the people who disappeared from the map were not inefficient. They were displaced. Imagine a worker in Cleveland in 1873. You had spent years learning the refining trade. Long hours, dangerous conditions, the constant risk of fire. You finally secured steady employment at a small refinery. Then ownership changes. quietly. No announcement, no negotiation with workers. 1 week you are employed. The next, operations are restructured. Some workers are absorbed into the new system, often at lower wages with stricter control. Others are simply released, not because demand disappeared, but because control centralized. This is the first illusion of monopoly. Lower prices at the surface, funded by destroyed optionality underneath. Now look at the owners. Those who sold early, who accepted stock and Standard Oil, became wealthy on paper. But even here, control remained asymmetric. You might own shares, but you did not control the network. You were now tied to it. Your wealth depended entirely on decisions made inside a structure you could not influence. Nominal wealth increased. Control decreased. And then there were those who resisted. They lost everything. Not gradually, but structurally. Their assets became unusable the moment access to transport was restricted. Barrels of oil sitting in storage had value only if they could move. Without movement, they were inventory. Without inventory turnover, they were debt. This is the second illusion. Assets are only valuable if the system allows them to function. A refinery without rail access is not a business. It is a liability. And this pattern does not end with oil. It repeats anywhere infrastructure becomes concentrated. The winners are visible. They appear in stock prices, headlines, and historical narratives. The losers are quieter. They are the ones who built inside a system they did not control, and discovered too late that ownership of the product means nothing when someone else owns the path it must travel. The story of John D. Rockefeller is not about oil. It is about control of movement, and that pattern did not end in 1872. It evolved. Today, the railroads have been replaced, not by something visible, but by something far more subtle. Digital infrastructure, data pipelines, cloud networks, search distribution. The modern equivalent of Standard Oil does not need to own your product. It needs to own how your product reaches the user. Consider Amazon. It is not just a retailer. It is logistics, warehousing, payment processing, and discovery, all integrated. Sell through the system, and you gain access. Step outside it, and visibility disappears. Now consider Google. It does not create most of the content you consume. It controls how that content is found. Change one ranking signal and entire businesses lose traffic overnight. No announcement, no negotiation, just a shift in the pathway. This is the modern rebate, not paid in cash, paid in visibility, in reach, in access. And like 1872, most participants believe they are competing on product. Better listings, better content, better pricing. But the battlefield is somewhere else. It is inside the network. So the question becomes practical. How do you detect this before it closes around you? Run a simple audit. Where does your income flow through? Who controls that pathway? Can they change the rules unilaterally? Have they done so before? If your answer depends on a single platform, a single distribution channel, a single gatekeeper, you are not operating a business. You are operating inside someone else's system. And systems do not need to destroy you dramatically. They simply need to adjust, quietly, precisely, until your margins disappear and your options narrow. History does not repeat, but bottlenecks do. And the choice remains unchanged. Build inside the network and accept its control, or step outside it and accept the cost of independence.